When you think of the United States, you think of freedom, endless possibilities, and the American dream. Our nation is one of the main world powers, and it leads other countries by examples in many ways. But there is one glaring outlier. No matter what the cause, the fact is that for decades, the U.S. has towered above other developed nations in gun violence. This problem is reinforced by poverty, drugs, and a strict division in gun laws and opinions in our country. Almost nothing is being done, and the problem is not getting any better. Too many Americans are dying due to gun violence. In this documentary, we will explore the gun violence in America through hard facts and various points of view from people who have differing opinions from totally different walks of life. A pastor who lost his sons, a gun store owner who works to keep guns from going to the wrong hands, a police chief who had to make a split-second decision, a gun rights supporter, a gun safety activist, and a crime reporter. Through these stories, we will uncover each of their beliefs through these three questions. Is there a gun problem? What is the cause? And how do we fix it?
How many more mothers, how many more fathers need to shed tears of grief?
There's no respect for each other no more. We have totally lost contact.
Before we do anything else, let's take a look at the numbers that lay out the problem. Jillian Berger will take us through an in-depth look on the facts of gun violence and where we as a country stand in this problem compared to the rest of the world.
Whether you're for or against guns, there's no denying the fact that America has some staggering numbers when it comes to gun violence. There are 13,286 people killed in gun homicides in America. Without counting suicides, 26,819 people were injured. Car accident deaths in America was around 35,000 people, while the amount of gun deaths was 33,000. That's a difference of only 2,000 people. As a nation, we spend millions of dollars on safety features and procedures. Even more money goes into protecting ourselves against terrorism, and new procedures are constantly being put into effect. Do you know how many people die from terrorism on average? About 31. Around 31 Americans die annually from terrorism, and yet we spend far more money and time protecting ourselves from that than from the gun violence killing thousands each year. If the Paris terrorist attacks from 2015 happened every month, French gun violence would still be lower than America's. In fact, about 27 Americans are killed from gun violence every day. 27 people at the least are killed in gun violence every day. Did you know that Americans are 7 times more likely to die from gun violence and 6 times more likely to accidentally die from gun violence? If we're that much more prone to dying from this than all of these other developed nations, why haven't we done anything? Even though the US is considered a well-developed nation, our firearm homicide rate towers over other countries at about 9,146 people. Germany only had 42 deaths. The US firearm homicide rate was higher than that of Pakistan and a little less than the Democratic Republic of the Congo. In a study with 22 other equally developed nations, the US had half of the study's population, but accounted for 82% of all the gun deaths. That's unbelievable. 92% of teenagers and young adults that died from gun violence happened in America. That's terrifying. More young people died in America than in Japan or the UK. Why? There's thought to be 300 million guns in the United States, held by only 1/3 of our population. So is it a surprise that gun violence has a 25 times higher rate in America than in those other nations? You're always warned about gun violence occurring overseas. However, there are enough statistics happening in America to showcase our big issues with these weapons. Around 20 people in America are killed by guns compared to every 1 person in the UK. About 2/3 of all US homicides are actually gun homicides. And as of September 26th, guns have been used in 71.5% of US murders. Did you know that across the country, the violent crime rate has actually gone down? In most places in the United States, violent crime rate is lower than it used to be. But of course, there are a few outliers such as Chicago and St. Louis. The ownership of guns, however, is on the rise. If we have a lower crime rate, then why are we buying more guns? The manufacturing of these weapons has gone up too, almost doubling from its total of over 3 million. Is the answer to the increase in ownership because of the manufacturing increase? Or did manufacturing grow because more people decided to pick up a weapon? Will this increase in ownership bring our violent crime rate up again? No matter where you turn, there's no denying the fact that America has a problem. The numbers and statistics are hard to ignore. America has an issue, and countries around the world just like us can see it, so why can't we?
Now that you have seen the unsettling numbers, let's hear from a Flint, Michigan pastor who is at ground zero of this crisis. Flint has placed in the country's most dangerous cities, and he knows firsthand the hardship that the city can bring. He lost both of his sons at different times due to gun violence. No parent should have to feel that pain of losing not one, but two children, especially when that life was taken too soon. Abigail O'Neill and Emmanuel Clinton have more.
There's a saying that says society is the church's report card. That means if society is the church's report card, you got 483 churches in Flint, and Flint look like it's a war zone. Some tell me church is not doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Pastor Jeffrey Hawkins has lived in the city of Flint all his life. And Flint, being no stranger to violence, was, for 3 consecutive years, the nation's most violent city of over 100,000 people or more, according to the FBI. While some people's lives took them to the streets, Father Hawkins got into church and eventually joined the ministry in 2002. He then started pastoring at the Prince of Peace Missionary Baptist Church in 2007. That year turned out to be one he would remember forever for all the wrong reasons.
My 14-year-old son was walking out of a convenience store just buying some candy and got caught in some crossfire and he got shot once in the chest and died.
And sadly, tragedy struck again in 2010.
My 26-year-old son was around the corner just talking to a friend at the friend's house. A guy decided to walk down the street and rob them both, shot my son 3 times. He died 8 days later.
Father Hawkins had been active against gun violence for years, but after his sons were killed, his activity increased more and more. So did the activity of gun violence. I've
been in my office before in broad daylight, and you hear a bunch of gunshots and you see people running down the street with assault rifles and handguns, and so we've experienced that so many times.
And Hawkins thinks that in inner cities like Flint, these occurrences happen too often.
To see it breaks my heart every time I hear about it. You can get so numb to this because it's like, it's almost old news when somebody gets shot.
Sadly, this is the reality of living in an urban area, such as Flint, where gun violence has been a major issue for decades. Hawkins thinks that drugs, a lack of jobs, and broken homes work together to inflame this problem.
It's just one dynamic on another, but the end result is, let's just shoot each other.
He's starting in the streets around his own church. They host job fairs and free breakfast to help people and keep them away from the crime in Flint. In addition to helping locally, Hawkins says that more regulations on accessing weapons, better communication between police and residents, and just generally taking responsibility could stop this violence. And he believes that his actions are making a difference.
I believe it's working because if you can help one, then you've just did some great work, and one can always turn to 2.
From a Flint local who had to live through the unimaginable. Now let's hear from a local gun store owner who tries to ensure that his guns only go out to the capable people. Bailey Telasco will bring you more on his quest to make sure that the guns he sells are in safe hands.
Williams Gun Sale in Davison has been in business for 90 years, and with the nationwide gun applications quadrupling since 2008, Williams is booming, selling over 100 guns a week. As Chief Operating Officer, Brian Wright has gotten to know people from all different backgrounds that come into his store.
We've had the 80-year-old grandma come in to buy a handgun for personal protection because she might live in an area where she feels a little unsafe compared to where she used to, all the way to somebody that just all they do is target shoot.
Williams' biggest concern is safety and doing things legally. That is why buying a gun here is such a process. That process begins with you must be 18 years old or older. Then, after picking out your firearm, they fill out the federal paperwork. It begins with general questions and then goes into deeper questions such as if you have a criminal record. Then, Williams calls the FBI and you will get a proceed, and you finish with the sale, a delay of up to 3 business days, or a deny and the sale is finished. Where the problem comes in is when people abuse the system and obtain guns illegally.
I think there's no doubt the 99% of the crimes or shootings out there are done where that firearm was obtained illegally.
The most common way firearms are obtained illegally is they are either stolen
or a legal purchaser buys a gun for someone who cannot legally own one. That is called a straw purchase. While Brian admits that there are people out there who shouldn't have guns, he knows that they are forever ingrained in America's culture.
I've grown up with them. Firearms, it's something my part of life, as well as millions of other Americans out there.
So when it comes to the gun violence problem in America, Brian believes that it's only affecting some places.
In certain parts of the country, yes. Chicago, there is a guns violence problem.
For Brian, the problem and the solution are the same.
People that do come in and try to buy a gun and get a deny, why are they trying to buy a gun? There needs to be more work done on the backside, not necessarily on the dealer front, but to investigate, hey, the people that steal guns, why do they still have a gun? Why do they just get a slap on a wrist for owning a gun when they shouldn't?
No matter how hard you try, whether bought legally or illegally, some guns will be used in awful crimes. The shootings that strike the most fear are the mass shootings. Because so many have happened recently, it has become part of our everyday lives to worry. Abigail Fulcher and I took a closer look on the mass shootings that are hovering over America. Columbine, Sandy Hook, Virginia Tech, Aurora. Before mass shootings were on the rise, these were just places on a map. The definition states a mass killing as a mass attack of 4 or more people during an event with no cooling off period. In the 17 years before Columbine, there were only 27 mass killings in the U.S. In the 17 years after Columbine, there have been over double the numbers. The media is also a huge influence on mass killings. News media and social media explode with headlines within minutes of hearing about a mass shooting. It can help spread awareness, but it can also strike fear. The mere fact is that before mass shootings erupted, people didn't have to worry about where the exits were located. You didn't have to worry about whether you were safe in a church, a mall, or even a school. This just shows how much the times have changed. In the past, nobody even knew what a lockdown drill was, and now it's a common practice in almost every American school. Gun laws are a hot topic in the U.S. Either they're too strict or too lenient, but no matter what, there always seems to be flaws. The government is no stranger to showing opposing sides according to party. The Democrats and the Republicans are at opposing sides on this quest for a safer America. You can go back throughout history and this is the case, and it won't stop at gun laws. Many politicians have voiced their opinions on what is enough and the steps to stopping this ongoing crisis. Alicia Paxton has the story.
The debate on gun control has been an ongoing topic for a long time now. But in light of recent events, it's becoming an even more stressed issue. And, as time goes on, it's now a game of tug-of-war between the Democrats and Republicans.
The Democrats go on high dudgeon that we've got to restrict the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens.
By the end of this year, Madam President, 30,000 Americans will have died from gun violence.
Now the government is stuck between a rock and a hard place, between gun control and upholding the right to bear arms. The opinions of the cause for this problem are widely ranged, which is creating a gap when it comes to a solution. After the mass shooting at the Orlando nightclub, Democrats had had enough, so much so that on June 22, 2016, just days after the shooting, they staged a sit-in in the House, led by U.S. Representative John Lewis, where they stayed overnight, demanding more laws controlling background checks and gun bans.
The time for silence and patience is long gone. We're calling on the leadership of the House to bring common sense gun control legislation to the House floor. Not next month, not next year, but now, today.
Rise up, Americans. This cannot stand.
The end result was the same as it has always been. Nothing. Nothing came after another mass shooting and another plea for change. The current gun laws in America stem all the way back to the Constitution, where our Second Amendment states that a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Since then, there has been different laws made to restrict just how much people have the right to bear arms. They vary from state to state, but the biggest law in concern is open carry of handguns and long guns. There are 31 states that allow open carry of handguns without any permit or license. 15 that require a permit, and then there are 5 states that completely prohibit it. When it comes to long guns, though, 6 states ban the open carry of long guns, while in the remaining 44 states, open carry is legal. Then what comes into play is certain gun types, or more specifically, assault rifles. As of 2016, there are 7 states that have banned assault rifles by their definition of what that is. And the definitions are drastically different, and not just with assault weapons. When looking at gun laws in general, they are so diverse that almost no state is alike. California has the toughest gun laws in America, followed by Connecticut, New Jersey, and Massachusetts. And looking at the gun deaths per year, the number seems fairly low in those states. Then, when you look at the states that have the least restrictive gun laws, like Mississippi, Kansas, Missouri, and Arizona, you can see that the death rate by guns is much higher. And when you add the poverty rate, things really start to fall into place. Excluding California, you can see that the states with lower poverty levels have lower death rates, and vice versa with the other states. The stricter the gun laws and lower poverty levels seem to bring a lower firearm death rate, but yet there is not enough national agreement to bring about better laws to any of these problems.
Both sides are dug in, but yet there is still no solution, and it is leaving everyone frustrated.
We're talking past each other. We've got a system, we've got a series of votes designed to all fail. We're going to accomplish nothing. That's what we're making sure of tonight. And it doesn't have to be this way. This is what is so maddening about this.
So now the question everyone's asking is when? When will the line be drawn, and when will things finally begin to change?
Newtown, Arosa, Charleston, Orlando. What is the tipping point? Are we blind? Can we see? How many more mothers, how many more fathers need to shed tears of grief before we do something? We cannot continue to stick our heads in the sand and ignore the reality of mass gun violence in our nation.
All hands are on deck for what may come out of this fight on guns. But as Dan Kildee says, the moving force for any solution or compromise lies with the people.
When people get engaged, we respond. And so if we are going to make progress on whether it's gun violence or saving the planet from global warming, it's going to be because citizens activate themselves, that they get on the phone, they talk to their representatives, they don't sit back and be quiet.
Police officers are viewed as protectors. Young children grow up wanting to be heroes, just like their hometown men in blue. But what happens when the view of lawmen is changed? For decades, police have been at odds with parts of the public. But recently, anger and fear of police officers have been shown to the American people firsthand. In a world of social media, one click of a button can introduce the public to the true horrors happening in our neighborhoods by police body cams and witness cell phone videos. These videos have inflamed fear and an already existing distrust between communities and police. Police shootings are not on the rise, but the ability to see these shootings has, giving us a front row look at the horrific violence, whether they are justified or not. In a 5-year study with the International Business Times, the shootings done by police officers were grouped by deaths occurring from a police gun, regardless if it was intentional. The report shows 77.7% of people killed by officers were men, while 51.1% were black men, and 46.3% were white men. 2.6% were other races. What can we do to change this stigma? How can we recreate the honest profession that strives on keeping America safe? Is the problem the citizens with guns, or is it corrupt officers? And are people upset that this is happening, or are they now forced to face the truth by seeing these shootings? Police violence does not speak for all officers. There are millions of officers that strive to recreate the torn relationship with the American people. Police around the world do the right thing and make sure that safety is their first concern. We spoke to the chief of police in Flint, Michigan, who knows firsthand the dangers that police officers can be in, and his own personal choice not to shoot. DTV's Quinn Trombley has more.
cannot pull your weapon because you are losing a fist fight.
The top cop in the Flint police force knows that police are pulling their triggers way too quickly in situations in which they feel fear.
Him hitting you and punching you is not deadly, is not a threat to your life. It means you're getting your butt kicked if you're getting punched on, but it doesn't mean that he's a threat to you losing your life.
Chief Tim Johnson knows all too well what it's like to have death staring him in the face. While being choked out from behind, a criminal reaching for his gun, and on the brink of passing out, Johnson made the conscious decision to tough it out and physically deal with the situation without unholstering his gun.
I could have shot and killed him, without a doubt, and walked away from it a clean shooting. I felt like I could handle him. I felt like I was in good enough shape to where I mean, it was a few times I could have shot and killed somebody, but I felt like I was physically fit enough to deal with the situation I was involved in, and I didn't shoot him.
Brian, so there's a black male pounding on the door, drove there in a red Jeep.
All these police-related incidents still confuse Chief Johnson, coming from a background where he dealt with the non-lethal options police officers have.
Why do you have to pull your weapon to kill somebody when you got a taser? Now that taser would be a device to bring somebody down and wound them, but they're not even pulling their tasers. They're just immediately going right to the weapon.
Police shooting people is not the entire problem. Gun violence in general has been plaguing the U.S., and Flint is no stranger to this. Flint has been constantly in the FBI's most dangerous cities in the entire nation, and the chief believes the cause starts with how people interact with each other.
There's no respect for each other no more. We have totally lost contact with reality.
With no more love for each other, Chief Johnson is still searching for the solution.
Talking about each other like dogs, the whole democracy system that we supposed to be living under and believing in, it's twisted. It's twisted, and what's going to fix it? I have no idea.
After hearing from police officers' point of view and his stance on police roles, let's get a closer look from someone on the other side of this problem. Haley Garrett spoke to a pro-gun supporter who has his own opinions on a solution.
Mike Chilson, husband and father, has very strong views on gun violence. Having grown up with a family of hunters and later on in life serving our country in combat, he has always been around guns, and now his family is too.
My wife knows how to shoot, my children know how to shoot, they're familiar with guns also, so they're not afraid, they're not curious, they know that they're off limits.
Chilson believes America does not have a gun problem, and violence is caused from within.
I think it's just violence is evil. People have evil in their hearts, whether it's a firearm or a knife or a hammer or a vehicle or anything, any inanimate object can be used to hurt or kill somebody.
According to Chilson, this violence problem will not be fixed by taking away America's guns, but doing so is putting gasoline on this burning fire.
If you look at Chicago as an example, has the strictest gun laws in the country, but has the highest rate of murder and violent crimes used by firearms.
While he believes in more lenient gun laws, Chilson's solution comes with some restrictions. He thinks we should arm our population so that the American people are not walking targets for criminals with illegal weapons.
You go to Texas, which is a total polar opposite, who has very lenient gun restrictions, and the violent crimes are way down.
Chilson's statements have some merit. In 2016, Chicago, whose gun laws are very strict, had a murder rate of 27.7, while Texas, who has much more lenient gun laws, had a much lower rate of 11.7.
However, citizens with a criminal record in regards to firearms or mental illness issues should not be allowed to bear arms. Chilson has one last restriction for the general population.
The forefathers let American citizens carry the same weaponry that the Army and the government had at that time. But now, obviously, does a civilian or just a regular citizen need a TOW missile launcher? Probably not. But it's that gray area in the law that says, well, we have the right to keep and bear arms, but there's nothing saying which type of firearms that we can have.
Chilson believes the laws we have now against criminals with illegal firearms should be more heavily enforced and looked over with these thoughts in mind.
People from all walks of life and all different backgrounds come together and either fight for the same thing or the opposing. Mike Chilson, the pro-gun side of our story, supports some of the laws and would even like them to be more lenient in some ways and strict in others. While Colleen Daly, a Chicago native, is an activist, fighting for restrictions to these laws. Haley Thompson went to Chicago and spoke to Colleen, who is lobbying for better laws and hoping to find a solution.
A lot of the kids we're working with don't think they're going to make it to their 18th birthday. That's not okay. But that's the real reality in these communities.
Colleen Daly, the executive director of Illinois' Council Against Handgun Violence, often finds herself working with the children of Chicago, whom are no strangers to gun violence. The sound of a gunshot is unusual to most children in the U.S., but sadly it's commonly heard in the city of Chicago. Just in the year 2016, there were over 4,000 shootings, and almost every weekend, the headlines looked like this. A problem so big, even a group whose sole purpose is trying to put a stop to gun violence, the solution isn't easy to find.
If there was an easy answer to this issue, we would have solved it by now. But there's not one gun law that's going to fix this.
When Colleen first started lobbying against gun violence, she said it was lonely dealing with an issue no one wanted to get involved with because it was too controversial. But as the shootings increased, so did her group of supporters.
This is an elite group of people that no one wants to be in this club. And what you hear from them time and time again is, I didn't get involved because I never thought it could happen to me. And then my child was killed.
Colleen's job is to make sure the public and lawmakers are aware of the dangers of gun violence. And she says the first step to finding a solution is making sure the issue's up for discussion.
But we need to live with our eyes open and talk about this issue and continue to talk about it. Sometimes I feel as though we don't get enough press.
I love this piece because I just think it's...
The artwork on Colleen's walls really tell a story of how the children of Chicago are dealing with gun violence.
It's communities that there's no economic opportunity. There's no jobs. Who's raising, so you have a mother that might have 3 jobs and she's doing absolutely everything she can, which is great, but who's raising her kids? The streets are raising her kids.
And some of these kids are gaining access to guns.
A lot of that stems from the fact that we're surrounded by states that don't have good gun laws. You look at a state like Indiana, where we've got guns just flowing over the border from there because they don't have background checks on all gun sales.
Although no easy answer has been found yet, Colleen believes more laws and some funding will help alleviate the problem. In the meantime, Colleen will keep doing everything she can to put a stop to gun violence.
From the standpoint of a woman whose life goal is to create a safer world, to a crime reporter on the streets of Chicago, both hold a unique take on the situation. We have shown you people who are for guns and against guns. Now let's hear a crime reporter who is based in Chicago, which may be considered the heart of this problem. Madeline Jacobson has the story.
Sirens burst into excitement down the packed streets of Chicago multiple times a day. Onlookers look over to see what all the commotion's about, but rarely get the full story. This is everyday Chicago life, but is there more to it than those sirens proclaim? Frank Main, a crime reporter for the Chicago Sun-Times, understands all too well.
It is like your hair is always on fire in Chicago. It is, especially in the last year and a half. Crime, murder and shootings have doubled, and so it's impossible to concentrate on every single one of those crimes.
Main has been covering crime for almost 20 years in Chicago. He says there's a certain level of violence that can't surely be stopped. Guns make it into the city in numerous amounts of ways.
There have been guns for decades in Chicago, and so there are old junky guns that some of these kids have. A lot of them misfire because they're not good. They'll steal guns from grandma and grandpa who have guns to protect themselves in these high crime neighborhoods. And then a lot of the guns come from suburban gun stores outside of Chicago.
Just last year, 4,300 people were shot in Chicago. Main recently did a series of stories over a 4-month span where he went on ride-alongs with Chicago homicide detectives to try to solve a murder case of a teenager.
What struck me about that story is that the homicide detectives were certain that his friends knew who did it, and his enemies certainly knew who did it. And as I sat there and watched these detectives talk to these people and tell them, we're not going to tell you anything, it became really clear to me why there's such a problem in Chicago.
It seems that more and more people are starting to not trust the police. Many, it turns out, have specific reasons.
You might have a migrant worker from California who's in Chicago and doesn't want to talk to the police because he's worried of getting deported, and he's worried that this guy who shot him is going to come back and do his family. You have people who got shot, but they were criminals themselves, and the judges didn't trust them, and they didn't feel like anybody in the system would really take their word seriously.
This melting pot of a city has a society that is too familiar with the uninvited guest, the gun. And when high schoolers were questioned about them, the results were shocking.
He was like, does anybody know somebody who's been shot? Raise your hand. Everybody raised their hand. He says, does anybody know 5 people who've been shot? Half the room. Does anybody know 10? Quarter of the room. Does anybody know 20? Hands still went up.
Yet, the remaining question still stands. How will this be solved? Maine believes that it's going to take much more than just arresting people.
It is a super complicated economic problem that needs to be addressed.
There is no doubt that America is deep in a gun violence crisis. By sharing these stories, we hope to have laid out the problems and the debate that surround guns in the U.S. There is a gun violence problem in this country. Americans are in the line of fire. You have heard the feelings of 6 very different people, the government standpoints, and the numbers that could leave you speechless. During this special, we reached out to the NRA, Black Lives Matter Detroit, and were denied access to gun shows. The debate about guns in our country is so strong that it has paralyzed us from making any changes. American people are still being shot in high numbers, and the problem is that the solution to this crisis doesn't seem to be a priority, and the people will continue to die.